The compound materialized through the green haze of night vision, like a ghost taking form in smoke. Commander Ilara Hartwell held her breath, counted 3 sentries on the rooftop, calculated wind speed at 8 knots northeast, and squeezed the trigger twice in rapid succession. 2 bodies dropped before the sound of the first shot reached them. The 3rd sentry turned confused, seeking a threat he would never see. She dropped him with a headshot at 400 meters while he was still raising his rifle. Clean, professional, silent. Inside the Tactical Operations Center 12 miles away, a voice crackled through her earpiece. "Ghost, you are cleared hot. HVT is yours." She didn't respond. Words were wasted breath. The high-value target was in the southeast corner of the compound 3rd floor, second window from the left. She'd memorized the layout 3 days ago. Memorization was survival. Hesitation was death. The suppressed HK-416 felt like an extension of her body as she moved through the Syrian darkness. 15 years of training, 5 years of operational deployments, countless missions that would never appear in any official record. This was her life. This was her purpose. And tonight, like every night before it, she would complete the mission and vanish before anyone knew she'd been there. Ghost, that's what they called her. Not because she was invisible, but because she left no trace except the silence that followed violence. The extraction took 11 minutes. The target never saw her face. By the time the local authorities arrived at the compound, she was 30 miles away in a civilian vehicle headed for an extraction point that would be abandoned and sanitized within the hour. Another operation completed. Another threat eliminated. Another night of sleep she probably wouldn't get. But that was 6 months ago. Tonight she wasn't in Syria. She was standing in front of a mirror in a cheap motel room outside Fort Bragg, North Carolina, staring at a reflection she barely recognized. No tactical gear, no night vision, no suppressed rifle, just a woman in a plain gray shirt and utility pants, civilian clothes that felt wrong against her skin, like a costume she'd been ordered to wear. On the bed behind her sat a manila folder with a red stripe across the top. Classification level top secret. Operation name Sentinel. Mission objective cultural assessment and integrity evaluation. She'd read it 4 times. Each time the words felt heavier. Fort Bragg, the place where everything had started, and the place where everything had almost ended. 15 years ago, she'd been a different person. 23 years old, fresh out of basic underwater demolition, training hungry to prove herself in a world that didn't want to make space for her. She'd arrived at Fort Bragg for advanced combat training with fire in her chest and determination in every step. She was going to be the best. She was going to earn respect through skill and dedication and sheer force of will. 3 months later, she'd been standing on the roof of the barracks building at 3 in the morning, looking down at the pavement 4 stories below, wondering if jumping would hurt less than continuing to breathe. The memory hit her like a physical blow. The equipment corridor, 3 instructors, hands that grabbed, words that degraded, the assault that left no visible marks but shattered something fundamental inside her. She'd reported it, filed the paperwork, sat across from a chaplain who'd suggested she pray about it, faced a review board that had looked at her with skepticism and asked questions about what she'd been wearing, how much she'd had to drink, whether she'd somehow encouraged the attention. In the end, they'd done nothing. Called it a misunderstanding, suggested peer counseling, recommended she consider whether military service was really the right fit for her personality type. She'd walked out of that final meeting and gone straight to the roof. 4 stories, concrete below, an end to the shame and the anger and the helplessness that was eating her alive from the inside. But she hadn't jumped. Master Chief William Grayson had found her there. He'd been an instructor, but not one of the 3. A Desert Storm veteran with more combat experience than most of the base combined, he'd taught advanced reconnaissance tactics with a quiet intensity that had made even the cockiest recruits shut up and listen. He hadn't tried to talk her down, hadn't offered empty platitudes about it getting better or time healing all wounds. He just stood beside her in the darkness and said 6 words that had changed everything. "Don't let bastards steal your future." Then he'd walked away. No dramatic rescue. No forced intervention. Just those 6 words delivered in a voice that carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much and survived anyway. She'd stepped back from the edge, not because she suddenly felt better, Not because the pain disappeared, but because somewhere in those 6 words she'd heard a challenge, a dare, a suggestion that survival itself could be an act of defiance. 2 days later, Master Chief Grayson had pulled her aside after training and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a transfer order to a different unit signed by someone high enough up the chain of command that no one would question it. And beneath the transfer order was a handwritten note on plain paper. 2 years. Justice is slow, but it's coming. Stay alive. Become dangerous. Make them regret underestimating you. She'd transferred. She'd stayed alive. She'd become dangerous. And 2 years later, all 3 instructors who'd assaulted her had been quietly court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. No press releases, no public acknowledgement. Just justice delivered slowly and precisely by a Master Chief who'd spent 2 years building an unassailable case while she'd been training to become a Navy SEAL. She'd never asked him why he'd done it, never questioned what had motivated him to fight a battle that wasn't his own. She'd just taken the lesson strength wasn't about being louder or bigger or more aggressive than the enemy. Strength was about being precise, patient, prepared. And now, 15 years later, she was back at Fort Bragg, not as a victim, not as a trainee, but as a weapon aimed at whatever rot still festered in the foundations of this place. The manila folder contained the official story. SOCOM wanted an evaluation of integrated training protocols, a review of how male and female personnel operated in joint combat preparation scenarios, recommendations for improving efficiency and cohesion, standard bureaucratic assessment, nothing threatening, nothing that would raise alarms. But beneath the official paperwork clipped to the back of the folder in a way that suggested it wasn't meant to be found easily was a single page with a different story. No official letterhead, no signature, just facts laid out in clinical military precision. 4 months ago, a patrol from Fort Bragg had been ambushed in Afghanistan. Intelligence suggested the Taliban had known their route, their timing, their strength. 6 Marines killed, 3 more wounded. Subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of information leaks originating from this base. Classified deployment schedules, patrol routes, names of undercover operatives. Someone was selling information. Someone here on American soil inside a military installation was actively working to get American soldiers killed. The official investigation had stalled. Too many officers involved, too many careers at risk, too much potential for embarrassment if the story went public. So SOCOM had made a different choice. Send someone expendable. Someone with authorization to operate outside normal channels. Someone who could investigate without oversight, without approval, without leaving fingerprints. Send a ghost. Alara had volunteered the moment she'd seen Fort Bragg in the mission brief. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she was seeking closure. But because she knew this place. Knew its blind spots and its hidden corners, and the way power protected itself when threatened. She knew how men who wore honor like a costume could rot from the inside while maintaining a perfect shine on their boots. And she knew that if there was corruption here, it would hide behind the same structures that had protected her attackers 15 years ago. The same casual dismissals, the same institutional inertia, the same suggestion that maybe the problem wasn't real, wasn't worth disrupting, careers over, wasn't important enough to risk the reputation of the base. She closed the folder and packed it into the bottom of her duffel bag beneath 3 changes of civilian clothes and a basic toiletry kit. No tactical gear, no weapons except a folding knife that could pass for a utility tool. Nothing that would contradict her cover identity. Starting tomorrow, she was Alara Mitchell, logistics analyst, civilian contractor brought in to evaluate supply chain efficiency and training operations. Boring, forgettable. Exactly the kind of person people would ignore while she watched everything. She checked her phone. 0430. The sun would rise in 90 minutes. Her check-in at the base was scheduled for 0800. She should try to sleep, should rest before beginning an operation that might take days or weeks to develop results. But sleep felt impossible. The memories were too close, the mission too personal. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded disturbingly like her 23-year-old self kept whispering the same question over and over. What if they break you again? She pushed the thought away. That woman had died on a rooftop 15 years ago. The person who'd walked away from that edge was something different, something harder, something that didn't break. Ghost. The word wasn't just a call sign, it was a reminder. She'd survived her own death once. Nothing these bastards could do would be worse than what she'd already endured. Alara lay down on the motel bed without undressing, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and waited for dawn. The main gate of Fort Bragg looked exactly as she remembered. Same guard shack, same concrete barriers, same American flag snapping in the morning wind against a sky that couldn't decide between blue and gray. She pulled her rental sedan into the visitor lane engine, idling, and felt her hands tighten on the steering wheel. 15 years. She'd operated in hostile territory across 4 continents. She'd completed missions that would be classified for the next 50 years. She'd looked warlords and terrorists and enemy combatants in the eye and never flinched. But sitting here waiting to pass through this gate, her heart rate was elevated. Her breathing was shallow. Her body was reacting to a threat that existed only in memory. She forced herself to breathe. 4 counts in, hold 4 counts, 4 counts out, hold 4 counts, repeat. Basic stress management, something every operator learned in week 1 of training. The guard approached her window. Young, maybe 22, fresh uniform, crisp, salute professional demeanor. Identification and authorization, ma'am. She handed him the folder without speaking. He scanned the documents, checked them against something on his tablet, nodded. You're cleared to proceed to Building 7, ma'am. Visitor parking is on the west side. Lieutenant Brennan will meet you there at 0800. Thank you. Her voice sounded normal, calm, gave nothing away. The guard stepped back, raised the barrier, waved her through. She drove onto the base and felt the past wrap around her like water closing over someone's head. The buildings looked different. New paint, updated signage, security cameras mounted at regular intervals on every structure. But the bones were the same. The layout hadn't changed. She could still navigate this place with her eyes closed if she needed to. Muscle memory etched into her brain 15 years ago, never forgotten, just buried beneath layers of new skills and different missions. She parked in the visitor lot and sat in the car for 30 seconds, watching the base wake up around her. Personnel moving between buildings. Training formations assembling in the distance. The rhythmic cadence of drill sergeants barking commands. It was all exactly as she remembered. Familiar and foreign at the same time, like returning to a childhood home and finding it smaller than memory suggested, but still recognizable in ways that hurt. At exactly 0800, a woman in a Marine Corps uniform approached the car. 31, maybe 32. Dark hair pulled into a regulation bun, lieutenant's bars on her collar. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd earned her position, but carried tension in her shoulders that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with whatever situation she'd been assigned to handle. Alara got out of the car, extended her hand. Lieutenant Brennan. Yes, ma'am, Alara Mitchell. That's right. They shook hands. Professional. Brief. The lieutenant's grip was firm without being aggressive, and her eyes did a quick, tactical assessment that suggested she had more field experience than her age would indicate. Good. Alara preferred working with competent personnel, even if they didn't know they were actually working for her. Welcome to Fort Bragg, Lieutenant Brennan said. Admiral Brennan sends his apologies for not greeting you personally. He's dealing with some operational issues this morning. I'll be your primary liaison for the logistics assessment. I appreciate your time, Lieutenant. Ashley, please. No need for formality during administrative evaluations. Alara filed that away, first name basis. The lieutenant was either very confident or trying to establish a casual dynamic that would make the contractor feel more comfortable and therefore less observant. Either way, interesting. Ashley, Alara said. Call me Alara. They walked together toward Building 7. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last of the dawn mist. Around them, the base continued its daily routine. Personnel moving with purpose, vehicles rolling past. The distant sound of weapons fire from the range complex carried on the wind like percussion from a rhythm section that never stopped playing. Have you worked on military installations before? Ashley asked. Several, mostly overseas deployments. This is my first stateside assignment in a while. How long have you been in logistics? Long enough to know that supply chain efficiency is where wars are won or lost. You can have the best trained soldiers in the world, but if their equipment doesn't arrive when and where they need it, they're just targets waiting to die. Ashley glanced at her, something shifting in her expression. Respect maybe, or recognition that this civilian contractor understood operational reality better than most officers. That's a more tactical understanding than most of the analysts we get. Ilara shrugged. I pay attention. They entered Building 7 through the main entrance. Inside the facility was what she expected administrative offices' conference rooms, the distinctive smell of military bureaucracy mixed with industrial floor cleaner and burnt coffee. Ashley led her down a corridor to a small office that had been set up as a temporary workspace. Desk, computer, filing cabinet, phone. Everything necessary for someone conducting a thorough but ultimately meaningless review of paperwork. You'll have access to training schedules, equipment logs, and personnel files relevant to logistics operations, Ashley said. If you need anything else, my extension is posted on the phone there. The Admiral has authorized full cooperation with your assessment. Thank you. Ashley hesitated at the door as if she wanted to say something else but wasn't sure if she should. Finally, is there anything specific you're looking for? Any particular areas of concern that prompted this evaluation? Ilara met her eyes, held the contact long enough to be significant, but not quite long enough to be challenging. Just standard efficiency review, making sure resources are being utilized effectively. Nothing to worry about. Ashley nodded slowly. She didn't believe that answer. Smart woman. Well, if you need anything, let me know. She left, closing the door behind her. Ilara waited 30 seconds, listening to Ashley's footsteps recede down the corridor, then crossed to the window. Third floor, western exposure. She could see a training yard in the distance, multiple formations running drills in the morning heat. Closer between this building and the yard was a collection of equipment storage structures and what looked like a maintenance facility. And beyond those buildings, just visible past a chain-link fence, was the equipment corridor where 3 instructors had cornered a 23-year-old trainee 15 years ago. Ilara turned away from the window and sat down at the desk, opened the computer, logged in with the credentials that had been provided, pulled up training schedules and personnel rosters and supply chain documentation that she would dutifully review to maintain her cover. But that wasn't what she was here for. She opened a separate browser window, accessed a secure connection through multiple encrypted proxies, and logged into a system that officially didn't exist. Dark Web Intelligence Database. Compiled from SOCOM operations, CIA intercepts, NSA surveillance, and a dozen other alphabet agencies that didn't acknowledge each other's existence in public, but shared information in the shadows when American lives were at stake. She entered search parameters: Fort Bragg, intelligence leaks, unusual financial transactions, communications with foreign nationals. Dating back 6 months, the system churned through terabytes of data. Progress bar crawling across the screen at a pace that suggested either the database was enormous or the criteria were generating a massive number of potential hits. While the search ran, she pulled up personnel files, started with officers, worked her way down through the ranks, looking for patterns, anomalies, financial stress, sudden lifestyle changes, anything that might indicate someone was receiving payments from sources that weren't their military salary. 3 hours later, she had 12 possibles, all Marines, all assigned to training operations, all with access to classified deployment schedules. 6 had financial issues, debt, child support, gambling problems, the kind of pressure that could make someone susceptible to recruitment by hostile intelligence services. She narrowed the list to 5, then 3. Corporal Dylan Mercer, 29, 7 years in the Corps, exemplary service record marred by 2 incidents of insubordination that had been officially noted but not resulted in formal discipline. Recent credit card debt of $47,000. No obvious source of income beyond his military pay. Lance Corporal Jake Sutherland, 26, 4 years in the Corps. Solid record, but nothing exceptional. His file noted multiple transfers between units, always at his own request, always approved without apparent difficulty. That was unusual. Transfers required paperwork and justification. Someone was smoothing his path, which suggested either he had friends in administrative positions or someone wanted him moved around for reasons that weren't in the official record. Private First Class Ryan Caldwell, 24, 3 years in the Corps. Youngest of the 3, but with a psychological evaluation that noted difficulty with authority figures and tendency toward risk-seeking behavior. He'd been flagged for additional monitoring but never disciplined, Another case of problem behavior being noted but not addressed. She pulled surveillance photos from base security cameras, matched faces to files. Dylan was tall, blonde, moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. Jake was bigger, broad-shouldered, with red hair and a permanent sunburn on his neck. Ryan was leaner, dark hair, sharp eyes that suggested intelligence, even in still photographs. And over the course of the past 2 weeks, all three had appeared together in security footage 17 times. Not during training, not during scheduled operations, just appearing in the same locations. Near the equipment storage buildings, in the maintenance facility parking lot, twice at the edge of the base perimeter near the civilian access road. Alara saved the images to an encrypted drive, then scrubbed her access logs. Officially, she'd spent the morning reviewing supply chain documentation. The personnel research would leave no trace. At 1300 hours, she left Building 7 and walked across the base toward the training facilities, observing, documenting, noting patterns of movement and behavior. The contractor, doing her job clipboard in hand, taking notes about equipment placement and resource allocation. But her attention was on the personnel, the interactions, the way certain groups moved together, the body language that spoke of comfort or tension or familiarity. She spotted Dylan Mercer in a training yard leading a formation through close combat drills. He moved well, confident, competent, barked orders with the kind of authority that suggested he enjoyed the power. Several female Marines were in his formation. She watched how he interacted with them. Professional at first glance, but there was something in the way he positioned himself. Always a little too close. Always blocking their exit routes when he stopped to correct their form. Always touching just briefly in ways that could be explained as instructional, but felt like something else. One of the female Marines flinched when he put his hand on her shoulder. Just a momentary tension. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But Alara had been trained to notice everything. She made a note on her clipboard, continued walking. Jake Sutherland was in the equipment storage area supposedly conducting an inventory check. But he was on his phone, texting, and the way he kept glancing around suggested he was worried about being observed. When he finished the message, he deleted it immediately, then deleted his text history, then powered off the phone entirely and removed the battery. Operational security protocol, not unusual for military personnel, but also the kind of behavior someone would use if they were communicating with people they shouldn't be communicating with. Alara walked past without acknowledging him. Just another civilian contractor, irrelevant and forgettable. Ryan Caldwell was harder to locate. She finally found him in the maintenance facility working on a vehicle engine with 2 other Marines. He was younger than the others but seemed to be directing the work. And when one of the Marines made a joke that involved a crude comment about a female officer, Ryan's laugh was the loudest. She watched them for 5 minutes from a distance, noted the dynamic. Ryan was the charismatic one, the one who made people comfortable, the one who could talk someone into something stupid and make it seem like a good idea. By 1500 hours, she'd observed all 3 targets, documented their patterns, confirmed that they operated together as a loose unit even when not officially assigned to the same duties. Now she needed to be observed by them, needed to establish herself as a presence on the base, someone unremarkable, someone they wouldn't pay attention to, someone they would underestimate. She walked through the training yard during the late afternoon drills, clipboard, civilian clothes, moving like someone who didn't quite understand military protocols and was trying not to get in the way. She stumbled slightly on uneven ground, corrected herself with visible embarrassment, looked around to see if anyone had noticed. Dylan Mercer was watching her. He said something to one of the Marines next to him. Both men smirked, dismissed her as irrelevant. Perfect. Over the next 3 days, Alara established her pattern. Morning in Building 7, reviewing documentation. Afternoon walking the training areas, taking notes, asking occasional questions that suggested she understood logistics, but not tactical operations. Always slightly out of place, always a little bit awkward. The civilian contractor who was doing her job but clearly didn't belong in a military environment. She observed the 3 Marines during every free moment, documented 17 more instances of them appearing together in locations that had no operational justification. Noted 6 occasions when Dylan made physical contact with female personnel that lasted just slightly too long to be purely professional. Watch Jake conduct 3 more phone conversations that ended with him deleting all evidence of the communication. And on the 4th day, she saw them corner Private Emma Reeves near the storage buildings. Emma was 22, fresh out of training, assigned to Fort Bragg 3 months ago. Her file showed excellent marks in combat readiness, but a recent counseling session for difficulty integrating with unit dynamics. Administrative speak for something was wrong, but no one wanted to officially acknowledge it. Dylan, Jake, and Ryan surrounded her in a way that looked casual, but created a box she couldn't easily exit. Dylan was doing the talking. Ilara was too far away to hear the words, but Emma's body language told the story. Shoulders hunched, arms crossed defensively, trying to smile like it was just friendly conversation, but obviously uncomfortable. Jake said something that made Ryan laugh. Emma's face flushed. She tried to move past them. Dylan shifted position, blocking her path, not aggressively, just enough to make it clear she couldn't leave until they decided she could leave. Then Dylan reached out and adjusted her collar, touched her neck, let his hand linger. Emma pulled away, said something sharp. Dylan raised his hands in mock surrender, grinning. The 3 men laughed and walked away, leaving Emma standing alone, shaking. Ilara watched from across the yard, memorized every detail, documented the time, location, witnesses, added it to the pattern she was building. That night, she sat in her motel room with all the surveillance data spread across the bed. Photos, financial records, communication logs, training schedules, behavioral patterns. 6 days of observation compiled into a case file that was starting to reveal the shape of something larger than 3 Marines with discipline problems. There were gaps, missing pieces. The intelligence leak investigation had stalled because SOCOM couldn't find the actual source. The surveillance suggested Dylan, Jake, and Ryan were involved, but not how. Not who they were selling to. Not what the payment structure looked like. She needed to get closer. Needed to be in a position where they would reveal their operation without realizing they were being observed, which meant she needed to stop being the forgettable civilian contractor and become something else. Something that would draw their attention. Something that would make them believe she was vulnerable. Ilara looked at her reflection in the motel room mirror, calculated the risks, weighed the mission requirements against personal safety, remembered the feeling of standing on a rooftop 15 years ago, wondering if jumping would hurt less than surviving. She'd survived. She'd become dangerous. And now she was going to use that danger to draw out predators who'd grown too comfortable operating in the shadows. Tomorrow she would stop hiding. Tomorrow she would make them notice her. And when they made their move, because men like that always made their move, she would be ready. Ghost. The word meant more than invisibility. It meant returning from the dead to haunt the people who thought they'd killed you. Tomorrow, Fort Bragg would learn what it meant to be haunted. She closed her laptop and lay down in the darkness, already planning the next phase of the operation, already knowing it would hurt, already accepting that pain was the price of justice. Some ghosts carried unfinished business, and Ilara Hartwell had been carrying hers for 15 years. Time to settle accounts. The 7th day began with calculated vulnerability. Ilara arrived at the training yard at 0600 wearing the same civilian contractor uniform she'd worn all week, plain gray shirt, utility pants, boots that looked new enough to mark her as an outsider. She carried her clipboard and moved with the same, slightly awkward gait she'd been performing for 6 days. The woman who didn't quite belong. The analyst who was trying too hard to understand a world that wasn't hers. But today she positioned herself differently. Closer to the drill formations, directly in the sight lines of the 3 Marines she'd been documenting, close enough that they couldn't ignore her presence. Dylan Mercer noticed her first. She felt his attention like pressure against her skin. He was running his unit through grappling drills, demonstrating holds and counters with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being seriously challenged. When he threw his sparring partner to the mat, he held the position 2 seconds longer than necessary, making a point, establishing dominance. His eyes found Ilara across the yard, held contact, assessed. She looked away first, made it seem like nervousness rather than tactical awareness, pretended to study her clipboard with sudden intensity as if his attention had flustered her. He smiled, predatory, satisfied. The morning drills progressed. Ilara moved through the training areas with her documentation routine, but she'd shifted the pattern. Slower movements, more hesitation. positioning herself in spaces where she was slightly isolated from the main flow of personnel, creating opportunities. At 0900 during a rotation break that Dylan approached her, Jake Sutherland and Ryan Caldwell followed a few steps behind, not obviously together but coordinated, a wolf pack that had learned to hunt as a unit. "You're the logistics contractor," Dylan said. Statement not question. His voice carried the tone of someone used to being obeyed without explanation. "That's right," Alara kept her voice even, professional, just slightly uncertain. "Laura Mitchell, been watching you all week, taking a lot of notes about our training operations. Just standard efficiency assessment, supply chain optimization, equipment, allocation, that sort of thing." Dylan stepped closer, not threatening exactly, but invading personal space in a way that forced a reaction. Step back and show weakness, or hold ground and escalate the tension. Most civilians would step back. Alara held her ground but shifted her weight slightly backward. Split the difference. Someone trying to be professional but uncomfortable with the proximity. "You know anything about actual combat operations?" Jake asked from behind Dylan. His voice was deeper, rougher. "Or just paperwork? I know enough to do my job." Ryan circled to her left, completing the triangle formation. "Casual. Accidental." Except it wasn't. They'd done this before. Practiced it. Perfected the art of surrounding someone without making it obvious they were cornering them. "Bet you've never even held a rifle," Ryan said. His tone was lighter than Jake's, almost friendly. The charismatic one. The one who made the threat feel like teasing until it was too late. "I've held a rifle." "Yeah, when..." Alara met his eyes, let herself pause just long enough to suggest she was deciding whether to lie. "Couple years ago, civilian shooting range. Didn't really enjoy it." They all smiled at that. The admission of weakness, the confession that she didn't belong in their world. "Nothing wrong with sticking to what you're good at," Dylan said. "Paperwork's important too. Somebody's got to make sure we get our supplies on time." The condescension was thick enough to cut. Alara ducked her head slightly, accepting the dismissal, playing the role. "Well, I should get back to work. Lots of documentation to review." She moved a step past Dylan. He shifted position, not quite blocking her, but making her trajectory awkward, forcing her to squeeze past him closer than was comfortable. His shoulder brushed against hers. Deliberate contact masked as accidental crowding. "See you around Mitchell," he said. She walked away without responding, felt their eyes on her back, heard Jake say something too quiet to make out, followed by laughter from all three. Perfect. She'd established herself as a target, someone vulnerable, someone they could approach without consequence, someone who wouldn't fight back. Now she needed to escalate the pattern, draw them in deeper, make them confident enough to make mistakes. Over the next 2 days, she continued the performance, appearing in locations where they could observe her, making herself increasingly accessible while maintaining the facade of obliviousness. The three Marines took the bait. Their interactions became more frequent, more physical. Dylan brushing past her in doorways, Jake commenting on her appearance with thinly veiled implications, Ryan engaging her in conversations that started friendly and gradually became inappropriate. She documented everything: timestamps, witnesses, locations, building a case that would be unassailable when the time came to bring charges. But she was also watching for something else: the intelligence leak, the actual reason SOCOM had sent her to this base. The sexual harassment was a pattern. She recognized a crime she could prove, but it wasn't the primary mission. She needed to connect these three Marines to the information breach that had gotten 6 soldiers killed in Afghanistan. On the 9th day, she found the first piece. She was conducting her routine sweep of the training areas when she saw Dylan near the equipment storage building, talking to someone she didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, mid-50s, average build, forgettable face, the kind of person who could disappear into a crowd without effort. They talked for 90 seconds. Dylan handed the civilian a small envelope. The civilian nodded and walked away. The exchange was smooth, practiced, unremarkable to anyone who wasn't specifically watching for exactly that kind of behavior. Alara memorized the civilian's face, waited until he'd left the base, then accessed security camera footage through her classified connection, tracked him from the equipment building to the parking lot, got a license plate, ran it through multiple databases until she found a name: Richard Voss, 54. Last known employment, CIA station chief for Berlin operations, resigned 1992. No current employment on record. No obvious source of income. No criminal record. No digital footprint beyond the basics. A ghost of a different kind. Someone who'd learned how to move through the world without leaving traces. She ran deeper searches. Financial records showed sporadic large deposits into offshore accounts. Travel records showed frequent trips to Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Mali, and the Middle East. Communication intercepts flagged 3 separate conversations with known intelligence brokers. Richard Voss wasn't a civilian consultant. He was a traitor, a former intelligence officer who'd gone private selling American secrets to whoever paid the highest price. And Dylan Mercer had just handed him an envelope that almost certainly contained classified information stolen from Fort Bragg. Ilara leaned back in her chair, staring at the monitor. The pieces were connecting. Dylan, Jake, and Ryan weren't just harassers. They were part of an intelligence operation. Small players in a larger network. Gathering information, passing it to Voss, receiving payment in return. Probably thinking it was harmless. Corporate espionage or some sanitized version of betrayal that let them sleep at night. But 6 Marines were dead because of the information these men had sold. 6 American soldiers ambushed in Afghanistan because someone on this base had given the Taliban their patrol route in timing. That blood was on Dylan's hands whether he acknowledged it or not. She needed to catch them in the act, needed irrefutable proof that would survive any court-martial, which meant she needed to let them take the next step. Needed to be patient even though every instinct was screaming at her to move. Now shut them down now, make them pay now. But patience was survival. And justice required proof. The opportunity came on day 10, equipment corridor drills, joint training exercise between multiple units. Crowded, chaotic. The kind of environment where people could slip away from supervision without immediately being missed. Ilara positioned herself near the corridor entrance with her clipboard documenting equipment flow rates, playing her role. The contractor, who was always present but never important enough to warrant real attention. Dylan's unit rotated through at 1400 hours. She felt his attention lock onto her immediately, watched him exchange glances with Jake and Ryan, saw the decision form between them without words. The communication of predators who'd hunted together long enough to coordinate without speaking. The formation moved through. Dylan stayed back, then Jake, then Ryan. They surrounded her with the same triangle formation they'd used before, but this time they were in the corridor, out of direct sight from the main training yard. Still technically visible to anyone who looked but isolated enough that intervention would be delayed. "Mitchell," Dylan said, still taking notes. "Just doing my job." "You've been doing your job for almost 2 weeks now. When do you actually finish this assessment?" "Another week probably. Depends on how much data I need to collect." Ryan moved closer, blocking the exit angle toward the main yard. "You know, for someone who's supposed to be evaluating training efficiency, you don't actually seem to understand much about how real training works." "I understand logistics." "Logistics," Jake repeated, made it sound like an insult. "Supply chains and requisition forms. Someone has to manage them." "Sure," Dylan said, "but maybe you should understand what we actually do with the equipment before you start making recommendations about how to optimize delivery schedules." Ilara kept her expression neutral, professional. "I'm open to learning." "Yeah," Dylan stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his sweat and the faint chemical smell of rifle cleaning solvent on his uniform. "We could show you some things, teach you what real training looks like." "I appreciate the offer, but I have a lot of documentation to complete." She moved a step past him. He blocked her path, more obvious this time. No pretense of accidental crowding. "You're always in a hurry to leave," he said. "Makes a guy think you don't want to be around us." "I'm just trying to do my job." Jake reached out and plucked the clipboard from her hands. Not aggressive, almost playful, but it was a violation, taking something that belonged to her without permission, testing boundaries. "Let's see what you've been writing about us," he said, scanning the pages. "Those are confidential work documents. I need them back." "Confidential," Ryan laughed. "Hear that? We're not cleared to see evaluations about our own training operations." Dylan moved even closer. His chest was inches from hers now, forcing her to either retreat or tolerate the invasion of space. You know what I think, Mitchell, and I think you're not really here to evaluate logistics. I think you're here to evaluate us. Looking for problems. Trying to find things to criticize in your little reports. That's not my function. No, then why do you keep watching us? Why are you always around when my unit is training? Why do I catch you staring like you're looking for something to document? His hand came up, touched her collar, adjusted it with the same motion he'd used on Private Emma Reeves, let his fingers brush against her neck. Alara didn't move, didn't flinch, met his eyes with an expression of carefully controlled discomfort. Someone who didn't know how to handle the situation, but was trying to maintain professional composure. Your collar was crooked, Dylan said, voice quiet, intimate, threatening, just helping you look presentable. Jake was still holding her clipboard. Ryan had circled behind her, closing off the retreat angle. They'd done this before, this exact scenario, the same progression of isolation, intimidation, violation. I need my documentation back, Alara said. Kept her voice steady, but let a slight tremor creep in. Fear that was performance, but sounded real enough to encourage them. You'll get it back, Jake said, eventually. Ryan produced something from his pocket, a training knife, rubber blade designed for drill sequences and grappling practice. Not lethal, not even sharp. But in the context of this moment, in the hands of someone who was deliberately creating threat, it became a weapon. You ever trained with knives? Ryan asked, spinning the training blade between his fingers. Casual. Practiced. The movement of someone showing off a skill. No. It's all about angles, pressure points, understanding human anatomy. He stepped closer. The blade continued its rotation. You don't need to cut someone to control them. Sometimes just the threat is enough. The training knife paused mid-spin, pointed toward her. Not threatening exactly, just positioned. A suggestion of potential violence hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. For instance, Ryan continued uniform inspection, making sure everything meets regulation standards. Sometimes you have to get hands-on to verify proper fit. The blade moved, touched the fabric of her shirt at the collar, traced downward slowly, not cutting, not even pressing hard enough to be painful, just moving along the line of buttons with deliberate precision. Seems tight, he said. Might not meet proper uniform standards. Should probably check. Alara's hands were at her sides, relaxed, non-threatening, but her weight was balanced on the balls of her feet, ready to move. Every muscle in her body was calibrated for violence, but her face showed only carefully managed fear. This isn't appropriate, she said. Isn't it? Dylan leaned in close enough that his breath touched her ear. We're just trying to help, making sure you're squared away. That's what we do here. We correct deficiencies. The training knife continued its path down the front of her shirt. Ryan's face was concentrated, focused, enjoying the power of the moment. Jake was watching with a grin that suggested he'd seen this scenario before and knew how it would end. Dylan's hand was on her shoulder now, holding her in place. Not enough pressure to bruise, but enough to communicate control. And then Ryan's blade bit into the fabric. The first cut was slow, deliberate, starting at the collar and moving downward, splitting the shirt open from the top button down. The sound of tearing cloth was loud in the narrow corridor. Loud enough to carry, loud enough that anyone nearby would hear it if they were paying attention. But nobody was nearby. They'd chosen this moment, this location, this precise configuration of timing and opportunity when intervention would be delayed long enough for them to finish whatever they'd planned. The shirt split open. Alara's undershirt was visible beneath. Ryan kept cutting. Jake was laughing now. Dylan's grip on her shoulder tightened. See, Ryan said, much better fit, more comfortable. Alara's voice came out quiet, controlled, final. Step back. They didn't hear the warning, or they heard it and dismissed it as the desperate plea of someone who had no real power to enforce consequences. Or what? Dylan asked, almost amused. You going to report us? Tell your supervisor that we helped adjust your uniform. Good luck making that stick. The training knife paused. Ryan was looking at her face, reading her expression, trying to understand why she wasn't showing the fear response he expected. Why this woman who'd been so carefully submissive all week was suddenly looking at him like he'd made a fatal miscalculation. Last chance, Alara said. Not louder, not angrier, just stated as fact. Step back. Ryan's mouth opened, started to form a response, started to say something dismissive or threatening or cocky. He never finished the sentence. Alara moved. Her right hand snapped up and caught Ryan's wrist mid-motion. Not grabbing, capturing. There was a difference. Her fingers found the radial nerve with surgical precision, applied pressure, that sent involuntary signals screaming through his nervous system. His hands spasmed open. The training knife clattered to the concrete floor. Before it finished, bouncing, her left hand drove upward. Palm heel strike to the philtrum, the soft cartilage between nose and upper lip. Not hard enough to break bone, hard enough to override his brain's ability to process what was happening. Ryan's head snapped back. His knees buckled. Alara pivoted, used his own weight and momentum, executed a textbook hip throw that sent him crashing to the concrete with an impact that drove the air from his lungs in an explosive gasp. Total time elapsed 2 seconds. Jake was still processing what he'd seen when Alara turned toward him. His hands came up, instinctively defensive posture, but his stance was wrong. Weight too far forward, shoulders too tight. Someone who'd done enough training to think he knew how to fight, but not enough to understand the difference between drill sequences and actual combat. He lunged, tried to grab her, probably thinking he could use his size advantage, his 80-pound weight differential, to simply overpower her through brute force. Alara caught his forearm mid-reach, redirected the momentum, hooked her boot behind his calf. Let physics do the work. His own forward motion became the force that toppled him. She guided him down, controlled the fall, drove him shoulder first into the stacked equipment mats, with a sound like a sack of concrete hitting pavement. Then she followed him down, applied a shoulder lock, Kimura position, arm bent at 90 degrees pressure directly on the rotator cuff, anatomical leverage that turned any resistance into exponentially increasing pain. Jake tried to move. Something in his shoulder made a wet popping sound. Not a break, just a dislocation. A reminder that the human body was a collection of mechanical parts that stopped working when the right pressure was applied to the right points. He stopped struggling, started making a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. Total time elapsed 5 seconds. Dylan hadn't moved. He was standing exactly where he'd been when this started, hand still extended toward where Alara's shoulder had been 3 seconds ago. His face showed the expression of someone whose reality had just inverted. Confusion, shock, the beginning of fear creeping in around the edges. Alara stood up, released Jake's arm, stepped over Ryan's prone body, faced Dylan with the same controlled calm she'd maintained throughout the entire encounter. "You done?" she asked. Dylan's eyes flicked to the training knife on the ground. 4 feet away, between them, accessible if he was fast enough. "Don't," Alara said. Simple, factual. "You won't reach it." He looked at her. Really looked at her. Seeing something he hadn't seen before. Or maybe seeing something he'd been trained not to see because it contradicted comfortable assumptions about who could be dangerous and who could be dismissed. He moved, lunged for the knife. Alara's boot intercepted his hand mid-reach. She didn't kick, she stepped, planted her heel directly on his fingers with 140 pounds of precisely applied downward pressure. Enough weight to pin, enough force to communicate exactly how easily she could increase the pressure from restraint to injury. Dylan screamed, tried to pull his hand free. Couldn't. "I said you wouldn't reach it," Alara told him, still calm, still controlled, voice never rising above conversational volume. "Now I need you to make a decision. You can keep escalating this situation and I'll put you in the hospital. Or you can stay down, stay quiet, and wait for the MPs to arrive." "Look, you crazy bitch, you broke my—" She increased the pressure slightly. Not enough to actually break anything. Just enough to make the threat real. Dylan's words cut off in a gasp. "That's not the decision I asked you to make," Alara said. "Hospital or MPs, choose quickly." Footsteps. Running. Multiple people converging on the corridor. The sounds of the scuffle had finally drawn attention. MPs, instructors, personnel responding to a disturbance. Alara lifted her boot from Dylan's hand. Stepped back, resumed a neutral stance, hands visible, non-threatening. The picture of someone who'd defended themselves and then immediately de-escalated. Gunnery Sergeant Kane rounded the corner first, two MPs right behind him. They took in the scene, three Marines on the ground in various states of pain and shock. One civilian contractor standing calmly with her shirt torn open, held together with one hand, a training knife on the floor between them. Kane's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, assessment, recognition that something had gone very wrong. His voice came out, sharp command tone, demanding immediate clarity. "What the hell happened here?" Nobody answered. Ryan was still trying to breathe. Jake was cradling his shoulder. Dylan was staring at his hand like he couldn't quite believe it still had all its bones intact. "Someone speak," Kane barked. "Now." Alara reached into her pocket, produced a black leather wallet, held it out toward Kane without a word. He took it, opened it. His expression changed instantly. Confusion disappeared, replaced by something that looked like fear, mixed with respect, mixed with the dawning realization that this situation was far more complicated than a simple training yard altercation. Commander Kane's voice had dropped an octave. Formal, careful. The tone of someone who just realized he was talking to someone who could end careers with a phone call. Alara said nothing, just held his gaze while the MPs moved past him to secure the three Marines. One of the MPs started to approach Alara. Kane stopped him with a gesture. "Don't touch her. Get those three secured. Medical isolation, no communication with anyone. Move." The MPs complied, lifted Dylan, Jake, and Ryan to their feet, started reading them their rights in the flat mechanical voices of people following procedure without understanding context. Kane was still holding Alara's ID wallet, still staring at the clearance levels and authorization codes and the information that officially didn't exist in any database, but carried more weight than any rank insignia. "Commander Hartwell," he said finally. Quiet, almost respectful. "Do you require medical attention?" "No." "Do you wish to file charges?" Alara looked at the three Marines being escorted away by the MPs. Dylan was trying to maintain some dignity. Jake looked like he might vomit. Ryan still hadn't fully processed what had happened. "I don't file charges," she said. "I make recommendations. And I recommend you call Admiral Brennan immediately. Tell him we have a situation that requires his immediate personal attention." Kane nodded, started to move away, stopped, turned back. "Ma'am, permission to ask, what exactly are you doing on this base?" Alara picked up the training knife from the ground, examined it, the rubber blade that had been used to cut open her shirt. Evidence. Proof, irrefutable documentation of assault. "Cleaning house, Sergeant." "That's what I'm doing, cleaning house." She handed him the knife and walked past him toward Building 7. Behind her, the corridor erupted into controlled chaos. Radio calls, rapid response. The machinery of military justice beginning to grind into motion. But Alara's mind was already 3 steps ahead. The assault was documented. The 3 Marines were in custody, but they were just symptoms, just small players. The real target was still out there. Richard Voss, the handler, the intelligence broker who was running these 3 idiots and collecting American secrets to sell to the highest bidder. And as she walked across the base with her torn shirt held together and her composure absolutely intact, Alara was already planning the next phase of the operation. She'd drawn the predators into the open, exposed them, proven they were vulnerable. Now it was time to hunt the apex predator, the one who taught these men that American lives were just commodities to be traded for cash. Time to finish what she'd started. Time to show Richard Voss what happened when you betrayed the people who'd given their lives to protect you. The ghost was done haunting. Now came the reckoning. Admiral Patrick Brennan arrived at the detention facility in 6 minutes flat. His vehicle left tire marks in the parking lot where he'd taken the turn too fast, and when he entered the building, his uniform looked like he'd put it on while running. The guard at the entrance snapped to attention so quickly he nearly dropped his sidearm. Alara was waiting in the command observation room. She'd changed into a spare uniform, anonymous gray fatigues that carried no rank or identification. The torn shirt was sealed in an evidence bag on the table in front of her, along with the training knife and a detailed incident report she'd written in the 20 minutes since the MPs had secured the corridor. Brennan entered without knocking, looked at her, looked at the evidence bag, looked at the monitor showing three separate holding cells, where Dylan Mercer, Jake Sutherland, and Ryan Caldwell sat in isolation, still trying to understand how their morning had collapsed into criminal charges and career-ending consequences. "Commander Hartwell," Brennan said. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the tension underneath. "I've read the preliminary report. I need to hear it from you directly." "What happened?" Ilara stood, not because protocol required it, but because the conversation would be easier if they were on equal footing. Brennan was 58, career Navy enough, combat ribbons on his dress uniform to fill a wall. He'd earned respect through decades of service. She could give him that much. Three Marines assaulted a federal officer conducting a classified investigation. They used a training knife to cut open my uniform shirt while making explicit threats. I defended myself using minimal necessary force. All three are in custody with non-life-threatening injuries. The evidence is documented and irrefutable. Brennan exhaled slowly, sat down heavily in the chair across from her. For a moment, he looked older than his 58 years, tired, like a man who'd been expecting bad news and had just received confirmation that it was worse than he'd imagined. "Classified investigation," he repeated. "SOCOM didn't send you here for a logistics assessment." "No, sir. I was sent to investigate suspected intelligence breaches originating from this installation. The assault was collateral to that investigation." "And the breaches?" Ilara pulled a sealed folder from her bag, placed it on the table between them. Top secret clearance band across the cover. She'd compiled the evidence over the past 10 days. Financial records, surveillance photos, communication logs, pattern analysis. Everything that connected three Marines to a former CIA officer turned intelligence broker. Brennan opened the folder, read in silence. His expression darkened with each page. "Richard Voss," he said finally. "I know that name. Or I knew it. CIA Berlin station early 90s. Disappeared after the Cold War ended. We assumed he'd retired quietly. He went private, selling classified information to foreign intelligence services. Chinese MSS primarily, but he's not particular about clients. Whoever pays the highest price gets access to American military secrets." And these three Marines were his sources. Small-scale operatives. Gathering deployment schedules, patrol routes, operational details. Probably didn't understand the full scope of what they were involved in. Probably told themselves it was harmless corporate intelligence, nothing that would actually get people killed. Brennan's jaw tightened. 6 Marines died in Afghanistan 4 months ago. Ambush. Taliban had perfect intelligence on their patrol route and timing. "Yes, sir. That information came from this base. Sold through Voss to whoever was willing to pay for it. Those 6 Marines died so Dylan Mercer could pay off his credit card debt." The room fell silent. Outside, through the reinforced window, the base continued its daily operations. Personnel moving between buildings. Training formations running drills. The machinery of military readiness grinding forward while the rot underneath was being exposed to daylight. "What do you need from me?" Brennan asked. "Full access to interrogation, unrestricted investigation authority, and immediate contact with SOCOM oversight." "Voss is still active. He's planning a final intelligence handoff within the next 48 hours. If we don't intercept him, he walks away with a complete roster of every SOCOM Tier 1 operator currently deployed worldwide." Brennan stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the base. He commanded the installation. He was responsible for the personnel he'd failed to protect from predators operating inside his own fences. "Commander, these men assaulted you, violated multiple UCMJ articles. You have every right to pursue maximum punishment through official channels. But if you're telling me there's a larger operation at risk, I'm telling you that justice for me is secondary to mission completion. I want these 3 Marines prosecuted, but I want Voss more. He's the source. He's the reason good soldiers are dying. And if we don't stop him in the next 2 days, he disappears and we never get another chance." Brennan turned to face her. "What is your play?" Ilara allowed herself a small, cold smile. "I'm going to make Dylan Mercer an offer. Cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. He gives up Voss's location operation details, communication protocols. Then we run an interdiction operation and shut this down permanently." "Mercer will never cooperate. His father's a colonel. He has resources, legal protection. He'll lawyer up and wait for his father to fix this like he's fixed every other problem in that boy's life. His father can't fix this. I'm Tier 1 clearance with SOCOM authorization. I outrank every lawyer his family can afford. And more importantly, Dylan doesn't know how deep this goes. He thinks he was caught assaulting a civilian contractor. He doesn't know I've been building an intelligence case against him for 10 days. He doesn't know I have evidence that connects him to treason charges that carry mandatory life sentences. You're going to break him. I'm going to give him a choice. Life in Leavenworth for treason or cooperation that might let him salvage something from the wreckage of his life. Most people choose survival when you frame the options correctly. Brennan nodded slowly. You have full authorization. Whatever resources you need, whatever access you require. This ends now. Alara picked up the evidence folder. It ended the moment they cut open my shirt. They just don't know it yet. The interrogation room was deliberately uncomfortable. Concrete walls, metal table bolted to the floor, chairs designed to be functional rather than ergonomic. Fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just annoying enough to create subliminal stress. Dylan Mercer sat alone, wrists secured to the table with restraints that allowed limited movement but prevented any threatening gestures. He'd been there for 3 hours, long enough to move through anger into anxiety, long enough to start understanding that this situation wasn't going to be resolved with a phone call to his father. Alara entered without announcement, sat down across from him, placed the folder on the table but didn't open it, just looked at him in silence for 30 seconds, letting the weight of her attention create pressure. Dylan's eyes were red, from tears or exhaustion or both. His right hand was bandaged where her boot had pinned it. His uniform was wrinkled, stained with sweat and the dust from the corridor floor. Corporal Mercer, she said finally, do you understand the situation you're in? I want a lawyer. You're entitled to legal counsel. But before you make that request official, I want you to understand something. The moment you invoke that right, this conversation ends. And the moment this conversation ends, your options narrow considerably. So I'm going to explain what's happening, and then you can decide whether legal representation is really your best choice right now. She opened the folder, slid the first page across the table. Financial records showing $47,000 in credit card debt, followed by sudden payments that zeroed the balance over 3 months. That's you. That's your bank account. Those payments, they don't match your military salary. They don't match any legitimate source of income. What they do match is the exact payment schedule for classified intelligence being sold to foreign operatives. Dylan's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. She slid another page across. Surveillance photo. Dylan handing an envelope to Richard Voss near the equipment storage building. That's you. That's Richard Voss, former CIA officer, current intelligence broker, specializes in selling American military secrets to whoever bids highest. That envelope you're handing him, that contained deployment schedules for the 3rd Marine Division. Classified information that you accessed illegally and sold for cash. I didn't, that was just treason. That's the word you're looking for. Title 18, United States Code Section 23381. Whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason. Mandatory sentence, life imprisonment or death. Dylan's breathing accelerated. I didn't know. Voss said it was corporate intelligence. He said companies wanted to know military logistics for planning purposes. He said it was legal gray area consulting work. And you believe that? I needed the money. My father cut me off after the last incident, and I had debts, and 6 Marines are dead because of information you sold. Alara's voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. 4 months ago, Afghanistan, Taliban ambush, perfect intelligence on patrol routes and timing. Those 6 men died so you could pay off your credit cards. Do you understand that? Can you process what that means? Dylan's face crumpled. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know anyone would die. Voss said it was just... Voss lied. That's what intelligence brokers do. They recruit idiots who are desperate or greedy or stupid enough to betray their country, and then they insulate themselves from consequences while you take all the legal risk. And right now, Dylan, you are facing consequences that will end your life, not metaphorically, Literally. You will spend the rest of your natural existence in a federal supermax prison, isolated 23 hours a day, with no possibility of parole, no hope of release, nothing but decades of concrete walls and silence until you die forgotten. She let that image settle, watched him process the reality of what she was describing, watched fear overwhelm whatever denial or rationalization he had been using to protect himself from understanding. Unless, she said quietly. Dylan's head snapped up. Unless what? Unless you cooperate fully and immediately. You tell me everything about your relationship with Voss, communication protocols, payment structures, what information you have provided, what intelligence he's planning to sell next. You give me enough to intercept him before he completes his final handoff. And in exchange, I recommend reduced charges. Not immunity, you're still going to prison, but cooperation might be the difference between 20 years and life. It might be the difference between federal minimum security and supermax isolation. It might be the difference between having any chance at a future and dying in a cell. Dylan was crying now, full breakdown, the facade of tough Marine corporal dissolving into a terrified 29-year-old who'd made catastrophically bad decisions and was only just beginning to understand the price. What do you want to know? Alara leaned forward. Everything. Start talking. 3 hours later, she had what she needed. Dylan had broken completely, providing details about his recruitment by Voss, the payment system, the intelligence he'd gathered, and most critically, the final operation Voss was planning. Tomorrow night, private airfield 100 miles south of Fort Bragg. Voss was scheduled to meet a Chinese MSS officer and transfer a comprehensive intelligence package, including complete SOCOM operational rosters, deployment schedules, and undercover operative identities. Market value estimated $10 million. Strategic value incalculable. The kind of information that could compromise active operations worldwide and get dozens of operators killed. Alara left the interrogation room and went directly to Admiral Brennan's office. He was waiting with 2 NCIS agents and a SOCOM liaison officer who'd arrived from Fort Meade within hours of being notified. We have location and timing, Alara said without preamble. Voss is making his final handoff tomorrow night. Private airfield coordinates in the brief. He's meeting a Chinese MSS officer to transfer comprehensive SOCOM intelligence. If that package changes hands, we're looking at operational compromise on a scale that could take years to recover from. FBI can handle the interdiction, the NCIS agent said. This is domestic territory, federal jurisdiction. FBI response time is too slow. Voss will have counter-surveillance. The moment he detects federal presence, he runs. We need surgical precision. Small team, fast insertion, capture before he knows we're there. You're talking about an unsanctioned tactical operation on American soil. I'm talking about stopping a triwider from selling intelligence that will get American operators killed. And I'm not asking for permission. I'm Tier 1 SOCOM with operational authority. I'm notifying you of my intent as a courtesy, but I'm running this operation whether you approve or not. The room fell silent. Bureaucratic authority colliding with operational necessity. The eternal tension between following procedure and getting results. Admiral Brennan broke the silence. Commander Hartwell has full authorization from this command. NCIS can provide support resources, but tactical decisions belong to her. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with SOCOM after we've secured the intelligence package and captured Voss. Are we clear? The NCIS agents nodded reluctantly. The SOCOM liaison smiled slightly, recognizing the bureaucratic maneuvering that had just given Alara complete operational freedom while covering everyone's careers if things went wrong. I need 4 operators, Alara said. NCIS tactical team, weapons vehicles, surveillance equipment, and I need 1 civilian advisor. Who? Master Chief William Grayson. He's currently on base conducting guest seminars. Retired SEAL Desert Storm veteran, extensive experience with Cold War intelligence operations. Voss operated in that same era. I need someone who understands how these old-school operators think. Brennan pulled up personnel records on his computer. Grayson's 67 years old and hasn't been active duty in 5 years. He's also the most experienced tactical operator within 100 miles of this base, and I trust him. That's worth more than youth. Your operation, your call. I'll have him briefed and added to the team roster. Brennan stood. Commander, this is high risk. If something goes wrong, a Chinese intelligence officer gets his hands on information that compromises every SOCOM operator in the field. That's not acceptable. I'll make sure nothing goes wrong. She left the office and walked across the base toward the bachelor officers' quarters. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire reflected in smoke. Around her, the base was transitioning from day operations to evening routine. Formations dispersing, personnel heading to chow halls and barracks. The familiar rhythm of military life continuing while she prepared to step outside that rhythm into something darker and more permanent. Master Chief Grayson was sitting on the steps of the BOQ smoking a cigarette that he definitely wasn't supposed to have on federal property. He looked up as she approached, and his expression shifted from casual to focused in an instant. Elara Hartwell, he said, heard you put 3 Marines in the hospital. Detention facility, and they're not hospitalized, just bruised. Also heard they assaulted a federal officer and got what they deserved. He took a long drag on the cigarette. Also heard you're actually Commander Hartwell, Navy SEAL Tier 1 clearance, and you've been running an intelligence operation on this base for the past 2 weeks. Information travels fast. Base this size, everyone knows everything within 6 hours. Question is, what are you doing here talking to a retired Master Chief who's supposed to be teaching tactical seminars and minding his own business? Elara sat down on the steps beside him, took the cigarette from his hand and took a drag herself, even though she'd quit smoking 5 years ago. Some conversations required old habits. I need your help, she said. Grayson raised an eyebrow. I'm retired, haven't run an operation since 2019. I teach, I consult, I collect my pension. That's my life now. Richard Voss, you know that name? His expression changed, something hard and cold sliding into place behind his eyes. I know it. Berlin operations early 90s. We crossed paths in 91 right after Desert Storm. He was running intelligence networks in Eastern Europe, recruiting assets among former Soviet military after the wall fell. He's selling American intelligence to Chinese MSS. Has been for years. Those 3 Marines I put down were his sources. He's planning a final handoff tomorrow night. If we don't stop him, dozens of operators get compromised. Grayson was quiet for a long moment, finished the cigarette, ground it out carefully under his boot. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of service and all the ghosts that came with it. What do you need in tactical support? You know how Cold War operators think. You know their tradecraft, their counter-surveillance protocols, their escape routes. I need that knowledge. You're planning to intercept him. Tomorrow night, private airfield, 4-person team plus me. Surgical strike capture before he knows we're there. And you want a 67-year-old retiree to tag along because I knew him 30 years ago. I want you there because you're the best tactical operator I've ever met, and because you taught me everything that has kept me alive for the past 15 years. And because she stopped, swallowed, let herself be vulnerable for the first time in a decade. Because I trust you, and I don't trust many people. Grayson looked at her. Really looked at her, seeing the woman she'd become, the operator who'd survived and thrived, the person who'd taken his advice 15 years ago and turned trauma into purpose. You know this is dangerous, he said. Voss doesn't operate alone. He'll have security, probably ex-military contractors, people who know what they're doing. You're talking about a potential firefight on American soil with no official authorization. I know. And you know that at my age I'm a liability. Slower reflexes, decreased stamina, all the things that get people killed in tactical situations. You're also smarter than anyone else I could bring. Experience counts for more than youth when you're hunting someone who's been doing this for 40 years. Grayson smiled, small, sad. The expression of someone who'd known this conversation was coming eventually and had been hoping it would arrive a few years later when he was too old to say yes. When do we leave? Tomorrow, 1800 hours. Briefing at 1500. Gear up at 1700. Hit the target at 2100 under darkness. Guess retirement can wait a little longer. He stood up, offered his hand. She took it. They shook the gesture, carrying more weight than any oath or promise. Just like old times, Commander. Except this time I'm the one running the operation. Yeah, took you long enough. He smiled. Always knew you'd end up giving the orders instead of taking them. Let's go finish this. They walked together across the base as night settled in fully. Tomorrow would bring violence and risk and consequences that couldn't be predicted. But tonight, for just a moment, Alara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not alone, not isolated in her mission. Partnered with someone who understood the weight of what they were about to do. Some operations you ran solo. Some required backup. And some required standing beside someone who'd been there when you were at your lowest and had given you a reason to keep fighting. Tomorrow they would hunt a traitor. Tonight they would prepare. And when the dawn came one way or another, this would end. The briefing room at 1500 hours was cramped and overheated. 4 NCIS tactical operators sat around a metal table covered in maps, satellite imagery, and equipment manifests. Alara stood at the head of the table with Master Chief Grayson beside her, both studying the aerial photographs of the target location. Private airfield, single runway, 2 small hangars, no tower, no permanent security, minimal lighting, used primarily by civilian aviation enthusiasts in small cargo operations. Perfect location for an intelligence handoff. Remote enough to avoid surveillance, accessible enough to allow quick escape if things went wrong. Target Richard Voss, Ilara began, 54 years old, former CIA Berlin station chief, extensive experience in intelligence operations and counter-surveillance. Assume he's armed, assume he's competent, assume he has backup we haven't identified. Our mission is capture, not kill. We need him alive for interrogation and prosecution. She pointed to the runway on the satellite image. Handoff is scheduled for 2100. Chinese MSS officer arrives by private plane, lands here, exchanges payment for intelligence package, and departs. Whole operation probably takes less than 15 minutes. We need to intercept before the exchange completes. One of the NCIS operators, a woman named Chen, raised her hand. Approach strategy, 2-phase insertion. Phase 1, I establish overwatch position here. She indicated a water tower 600 meters from the runway with long-range rifle, visual confirmation of targets covering fire if needed. Phase 2 ground team approaches from the north using this access road coordinates insertion with my signal. Grayson provides tactical guidance and rear security. Grayson leaned forward, pointing to the map. Voss will have counter-surveillance, probably motion sensors around the perimeter, thermal imaging, maybe even drones. Standard CIA tradecraft from the 90s. We need to approach, cold kill all electronics, no radio chatter until we're committed move during his observation gaps. How do we identify observation gaps? Chen asked. Experience. Operators like Voss follow patterns. They scan in predictable intervals. Every 90 seconds to 2 minutes, he'll do a full 360 sweep. We move in those 90-second windows. Fast, silent, disciplined. Another operator, Bradford Young and eager, looked skeptical. That's pretty thin margin for error, which is why we drill it. We run the approach sequence 4 times before we go operational. By the time we hit the target, everyone knows their position, their timing, their fallback options. No surprises, no improvisation, precision, execution. They spent the next 3 hours running through the operation step by step, approach routes, communication protocols, weapon assignments, contingency plans for every scenario they could imagine. Ilara had run dozens of operations over her career, but this one felt different, more personal, more final. This wasn't some foreign target in a combat zone. This was an American traitor on American soil, and the margin between success and catastrophic failure was measured in seconds. At 1700, they geared up. Ilara checked her weapons with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. HK-416 carbines suppressed loaded with subsonic ammunition for quiet operation. M110 SAS sniper rifle, .308 caliber match-grade ammunition capable of precision shots out to 800 meters. Sig Sauer P226 sidearm, 3 fragmentation grenades, combat knife, night vision goggles, radio headset, ballistic vest rated to stop rifle rounds. Grayson stood beside her loading his own weapons. He'd chosen an older loadout 1911 pistol that he'd carried in Desert Storm Remington, .870 shotgun, Cold War-era web gear that looked ancient but was meticulously maintained. "You nervous?" he asked quietly. "Always. Anyone who says they're not nervous before an operation is either lying or stupid." "Good. Nervous keeps you sharp. Overconfident gets you killed." They loaded into two vehicles, Alara and Grayson in the lead vehicle with Chen, the other three operators in the follow vehicle. They drove south through the gathering darkness, civilian vehicles on civilian roads, nothing to distinguish them from any other traffic. But inside each vehicle was enough firepower to fight a small war. At 2000, they reached the staging area, abandoned gas station 2 miles from the target airfield. They parked behind the building, killed the engines, and waited. Silence settled over the team, pre-operation tension that every operator knew. The minutes before action when fear and focus competed for dominance. Alara checked her watch. 2015, 45 minutes until scheduled contact. Time to move. She looked at Grayson. He nodded. Ready. She looked at the 4 NCIS operators. They nodded. Ready. "Let's go hunting," she said. They moved through the darkness like shadows with purpose. Alara took point, leading them cross-country toward the water tower that would be her overwatch position. The night was clear, stars visible overhead, temperature dropping into the low 60s. Perfect conditions. No moon, minimal ambient light. The kind of darkness that swallowed movement and made stealth possible. She reached the water tower at 2040. Climbed the access ladder, silently, rifle slung across her back, moving with the ease of someone who'd done urban climbing in hostile territory dozens of times. At the top, she had perfect sight lines to the airfield. 620 meters, well within effective range. She set up her position. Rifle on a stable rest. Scope dialed in. Night vision providing clear visual on the runway. Radio check with the ground team. "Overwatch in position. I have eyes on target area. Runway clear. No contacts." Grayson's voice came back through her earpiece. "Ground team advancing. 2 minutes to position." She watched through the scope. The airfield was dark except for a single security light near the larger hangar. No vehicles visible, no movement. But she knew Voss was there, somewhere, waiting. At 2055, a vehicle appeared. Black SUV, civilian plates approaching from the south access road. It parked near the hangar. 2 men got out. One was Richard Voss. She recognized him from the surveillance photos. The other was younger, bigger, moving with a military precision. Security, probably ex-Spetsnaz or similar contractor. Both were armed. 2 contacts. Positive ID on Voss. 1 security asset, both armed. No sign of the buyer yet. At 2100 exactly, she heard the aircraft. Small plane, single engine approaching from the east. It circled once, confirming the airfield, then lined up for landing. Touched down smoothly. Taxied to a stop near Voss's position. The plane's door opened. A man stepped out. Asian, mid-40s, wearing a suit that looked expensive even in the darkness. Chinese MSS officer. He carried a metal briefcase. Payment. Voss approached with a similar briefcase. Intelligence package. "Ground team, you are go. Repeat, you are go. Move now." Grayson's team erupted from concealment. 4 operators moving fast across the open ground, weapons, up flashlights, activated voices shouting commands. "Federal agents on the ground, hands where we can see them." Voss reacted instantly. Grabbed the MSS officer, used him as a shield, pulled a sidearm. His security contractor opened fire. Muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Alara's rifle cracked once. The security contractor dropped. Clean headshot. 620 meters. Perfect. But Voss was running, dragging the Chinese officer toward the plane, trying to reach the aircraft and escape. Runner. Voss is mobile, heading for the plane. She tracked him through the scope. Difficult shot. Moving target. Human shield. Too much risk of hitting the MSS officer. Grayson broke from the team, running directly at Voss with the speed of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and knew exactly how to close distance under fire. He was 67 years old, and he moved like lightning. Voss saw him coming, turned, fired 3 shots, all missed. Grayson returned fire with the 1911. 1 shot, center mass. Voss stumbled. The MSS officer broke free, ran toward the plane. Grayson tackled Voss before he could recover. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and violence. Ilara was already moving, climbing down the water tower at speed that bordered on reckless. 200 feet in 30 seconds. She hit the ground running. 600 meters, sprint pace, full tactical gear. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. She ran anyway. She reached the airfield as Grayson and Voss rolled across the tarmac. Voss had a knife, combat blade. He slashed at Grayson's face, drew blood across his cheek. Grayson blocked the second strike, but he was slower, older, fighting someone 30 years younger who'd never stopped training. Ilara crashed into Voss from the side, full tackle, all her momentum behind it. They hit the ground hard. She felt his ribs compress under the impact, heard air explode from his lungs. Then she was on him, knee on his chest, gun to his temple, absolutely zero hesitation in her eyes. Move and I put a round through your brain. Understand? Voss looked up at her, blood on his lips, recognition dawning. You're the woman from the base, the contractor. Commander Ilara Hartwell, Navy SEAL, and you just ran out of places to hide. The NCIS team secured him, flex cuffs, full restraints, read him his rights while he was still catching his breath. The MSS officer was apprehended attempting to start the plane. The intelligence packages were recovered from both briefcases. Mission complete. Ilara helped Grayson to his feet. The cut on his face was bleeding but not serious. He was breathing hard, leaning on her for support, but his eyes were clear. You all right? She asked. Been worse. That son of a bitch can still fight. You saved the operation. That tackle was perfect. Wasn't a tackle, was controlled collision with intent to disrupt. There's a difference, Virschin. He grinned through the blood. Still got it. Yeah, you do. They stood together watching the NCIS team load Voss and the MSS officer into separate vehicles. Evidence secured. Target neutralized. Operation successful. But Ilara didn't feel triumphant. Just tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying something heavy for too long and finally setting it down. It's over, Grayson said quietly. This part is court-martial, prosecution, justice through official channels. That takes time. But your mission is complete. You did what you came here to do. She nodded slowly. Fort Bragg, the place where everything had started 15 years ago. She'd come back as a ghost hunting predators in the shadows, and she'd expose them to daylight. Not just the 3 Marines who'd assaulted her, not just the intelligence broker who'd been selling American lives, but the whole system that had protected them. The culture that had allowed them to operate with impunity. That was changing now. Ashley Brennan was already implementing new protocols, independent reporting systems, real accountability. The reforms would take years to fully implement, but the foundation was laid. And Ilara Hartwell had been the catalyst, the ghost who'd come back to haunt the people who thought they'd broken her. What's next for you? Grayson asked. SOCOM has 3 more bases with similar problems. They want me to run the same operation. Infiltrate, document, expose. You gonna do it? Yes, because this can't just be about me anymore. Can't just be about settling my own accounts. There are women at every base who are going through what I went through, and they need someone who understands. Someone who survived. Someone who came back dangerous enough to make the bastards pay. Grayson put his hand on her shoulder. You're building something, a legacy, the kind of thing that outlives individual operations. Maybe, or maybe I'm just trying to make sure no one else has to stand on a rooftop wondering if jumping would hurt less than surviving. You saved more than just yourself tonight. You know that, right? Those reforms at Fort Bragg, that's going to protect hundreds of women over the next decade. Thousands, maybe. That matters. She looked at him. The man who'd found her on that rooftop 15 years ago and given her a reason to step back from the edge. The mentor who'd turned her trauma into purpose. The father figure who'd taught her that strength wasn't about being louder or bigger, but about being precise and patient and prepared. Thank you, she said, for everything, for then, for tonight, for believing I could be more than what they tried to make me. You were always more. I just made sure you survived long enough to prove it. He smiled. Now go finish what you started. Those other bases aren't going to reform themselves. 6 months later, Fort Bragg had been transformed. The changes weren't visible in the buildings or the training yards. They were visible in the way female Marines walked across the base, heads up, shoulders back, without that constant vigilance that came from never knowing when someone would cross a line. They were visible in the way male Marines checked each other, intervened when jokes went too far, understood that silence made them complicit. The new protocols were operational. The independent reporting system had processed 12 complaints in the first month alone, all investigated thoroughly, all resulting in real consequences. 3 more Marines discharged for harassment, 2 officers formally reprimanded. 1 chaplain removed from counseling duties for telling a victim to pray about forgiveness. The message was clear. The culture had changed. And it had changed because one woman had refused to let Fort Bragg break her twice. Alara stood at the base gun range watching Private Emma Reeves instruct a group of female recruits on advanced marksmanship. Emma had testified at the court-martial, faced her attackers, watched them receive dishonorable discharges and prison sentences. And then she'd stayed, rebuilt her career, become an instructor herself. That was the real victory, not the punishment, not the convictions, but the survival, the transformation of victims into survivors, survivors into warriors, warriors into mentors, who would teach the next generation that they didn't have to accept abuse as the price of service. Grayson approached from behind. He'd officially unretired, accepted a position as senior tactical advisor for SOCOM training reform, working alongside Alara to implement changes across multiple installations. "Ready for the next one?" he asked. She looked at the folder in his hand. New assignment, different base, same mission. Hunt the predators, expose the rot, force accountability where systems had failed. Always ready. Good, because this one's worse than Bragg. Systemic issues going back a decade. SOCOM thinks it might require a full operational overhaul. Then that's what we'll do. She took the folder. How long do we have? 4 months, maybe 6 if you need more time for documentation. 4 months is enough. She opened the folder, started reading, already planning the approach, the infiltration strategy, the evidence-gathering protocols. Same playbook, different target. Same playbook, Grayson agreed, but you're writing new chapters now. This isn't just about revenge or justice for yourself anymore. This is about building something permanent, something that protects people who can't protect themselves. Alara watched Emma correct a recruit's stance, watched the young woman adjust her position and fire again with improved accuracy, watched confidence grow in someone who'd been broken and rebuilt herself into something stronger. "That's the mission," she said. "That's always been the mission. Make sure the bastards can't hide anymore. Make sure the system works for everyone, not just the people at the top. Make sure no one else has to feel what I felt 15 years ago. Think you can do it?" She smiled, cold, certain, the expression of someone who died once and come back harder. "I'm a ghost, Master Chief. Ghosts don't stop haunting until the house is clean." They walked together toward the command building. New assignment, new base, new predators to hunt. The work would never really be finished. There would always be more rot to expose, more systems to reform, more battles to fight. But that was fine. Alara Hartwell had spent 15 years becoming dangerous. Now she would spend the rest of her career making sure that danger protected the people who needed it most. Some ghosts carried unfinished business. Some ghosts became legends. And some ghosts became the reckoning that evil men feared in the darkness. The silent reckoning had only just begun.